Well, good morning, folks. This is Billy Trout, the manager of taxpayer education for the Tennessee Department of Revenue. And on behalf of our commissioner, David Jerigano, and our staff in taxpayer services and our audit division, we'd like to welcome you to today's presentation. We're going to be talking about a very technical subject here for consolidated net worth for franchise and excise tax. So we brought a couple of experts with us, and let me introduce you to a couple of them. First of all, from our Taxpayer Services Registration Division, we have Miss Andrea Fields. She's a supervisor there, so she knows a lot of stuff, and we're glad to have her on board, as well as Cameron Young from our Audit Division, and we appreciate their help. Along with them, we have our Assistant Director in Taxpayer Services, Dan Vincent, on board to help us with chat a little bit later. And then our fabulous hostess for the last time, Katie Julian. Uh, this is your final webinar, and I know this brings tears to your eyes, but in mine too, honestly. But at the same time, this is probably a good time to thank Katie for all of her help on this. Katie is moving on to a promotion, and we're very happy about that. And I know that all of you that do these webinars or have seen her appreciate her hard work. And Katie, we'll miss you, but I'm going to bother you for a long time anyway, so it's all good.
Feel free.
So I'll turn it over to you, Katie. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Billy. I am going to miss doing these webinars, but I'll be attending them as an attendee moving forward, which that'll be fun. Just a few things to go over with you guys before we get going here. There will be a recording of today's presentation, maybe later today, but definitely by tomorrow in our webinar video library. You can see a link there. If you need CPE credit, you can request that in the exit survey as you are leaving the webinar. Just answer yes to question number 4 on there and make sure you list your name as you'd like it to appear on your CPE certificate on that. I'll remind you again about that when we get closer to the point. You see that QR code in front of you. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you over to a PDF of today's presentation. You also see a link to it if you put it in there about 10 minutes ago or 5 minutes ago in the chat. Speaking of chat, we will have it closed during the first portion of this webinar as we go through a short presentation, and then we will open up the chat for you to put your questions into our panel here. All right, and we'll share what you see in the middle of your screen there about contact information, revenue.support@tn.gov, and our general tax line. We'll share that again at the end, but for questions that we don't get around to and just general questions forever and always, that's how you can get in touch with us. And again, we'll share that again in a little while. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Cameron and Andrea to come on screen with us here as we get going with our presentation about consolidated net worth election. Just what you want to hear about today as you're snowed in or iced in, which most of Tennessee is, but very exciting topic here. And I will say I'm very grateful to have Cameron and Andrea with us for this one especially. So we'll go ahead and get started here. This is what we're going to be talking about today, an overview of what consolidated net worth is. It's an election that allows affiliated entities to compute franchise tax net worth on a consolidated basis. The election is voluntary and applies to the net worth base only. We're going to be defining what an affiliated entity is, talking about the calculation, registering for this election, and sharing some resources. And as I said, but for the second half of this webinar, we are going to be taking your questions about it. So before I get started, I want to talk briefly and ask you, Andrea, what consolidated net worth is and what it's not. It's not a combined return, right?
Yes, so a consolidated election is not a combined return. So to say if an entity is filing a F&E 174, they don't necessarily have to file a consolidated net worth election to file a combined return that way. That would usually be considered as a unitary group. With that, you don't need a consolidated election in place to file as a unitary group.
Great, thank you. And
Absolutely.
Cameron, why would somebody want to, what would be the appeal of having consolidated net worth election?
So we allow taxpayers just to file their net worth using Schedule F2 on a consolidated basis versus using F1 on a non-consolidated basis. So, there'd be tax benefits potentially using, consolidated, but yeah, it goes entity by entity to understand which one would be better, and also to know that once you make the election, it's binding for 5 years.
Right. We're going to talk
Yeah, a
about
lot of
that
tax
binding a little bit later too. You got to get locked in. If you're going to do it, you're locked into it, right? Um, cool. Well, we're going to go ahead now and define what an affiliated group is. So, but first off, a taxpayer that's standing alone definitely has nexus in Tennessee for franchise tax, first and foremost there. But then after that, all entities in which the taxpayer directly or indirectly has more than 50% ownership interest. Also, all entities directly or indirectly have more than 50% ownership interest in the taxpayer, and all other entities, regardless of whether they do business in Tennessee, in which the entity described in the previous bullet directly or indirectly has more than 50% ownership. So basically, in a nutshell, it's about ownership control, right? Greater than 50%, either upstream, parent company, or downstream subsidiary. Anything that you all want to add to this?
Yeah, when you're, of course, when you make the consolidated net worth election, it's very important to make sure, the entities that do have nexus to Tennessee that are filing, it's important to put them on part one, and then entities that are being included on the election but not required to file in Tennessee be put on part two, because if you include them on the other parts, we may have a lot of errors, create counts in error and a lot of cleanup. But yeah, it's just super important to put them on the correct part on the consolidated net worth election.
Great. So part one is if they're going to be subject to Tennessee franchise tax.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
Is that something, Andrea, being in the registration unit, is that something that you see happen a lot on your end?
It is. We frequently
Okay.
see that error occur on the elections where entities that are not subject to franchise tax, they're listed on part one and accounts are created for those entities in error. So it's very important to place the entities on the correct portion of the application.
Gotcha. All right. We're going to move along here then, unless y'all have something else to add to that. Calculating CNW, Consolidated Net Worth. You can see here separate entity filing. You've got total assets minus total liabilities, gives you your net worth. Consolidated filing, no, it's calculated the same way. It's the same formula, I'm sorry, but calculated using generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit, Cameron,
Yeah, so
when it comes to the pro
it'll be
forma?
based on the pro forma federal return, and it'll just include, it'll eliminate, members with, eliminate members, group and holdings, non-domestic persons, like investments have been eliminated. So you'll eliminate things like that, and then also members that don't meet the ownership requirement. So if they don't have 50% ownership, you would eliminate those members on that net worth balance sheet, and just include 50% ownership members and the ones that are being included on the election itself, primarily.
Great. Okay. All right, we're going to move into talking about registration. This is your area, Andrea. There are two ways you can do it. I call it the old-fashioned way. There's a paper application. If you've got the PDF to this, you can link over using that hyperlink you see there in front of you. And then via TinTap. And we're going to explore how to do it on TinTap here in the next few slides. But, sometimes I still like to, almost everything you can do on TinTap now, definitely all your filing. And then a lot of the exemptions you can apply for this election, you can apply for on TinTap. But it's still nice sometimes if you're wanting to get a better understanding of consolidated net worth. The paper application does have a really good explanation of consolidated net worth in the instructions area. I like to go to the old paper applications, even of the tax forms, just to research a little bit and learn about them. It's because there's not that resource on TinTap to be able to get details about each line of any application or any form that we've got. But Also, the election must be made on or before the due date of the return for the period for which the election is to first apply. As Cameron was mentioning, it is binding for a minimum of 5 years. There are some exceptions to that and amendments you can make. If we'll talk about that here in a little while, but elections do remain in effect after the minimum period until you do revoke the election. So anything either one of y'all want to add to this slide before I move along?
So with the election, we do accept elections what can be considered as late as long as they're filed before the extension due date. So if you filed an extension for franchise and excise, you can submit your election up until that date as well.
Good to know. And I think that just in terms of a late election, we were talking about this the other day, Cameron. It's other than filing by by your extension, like Andrea just mentioned, there are very few exceptions to this, and those being if there's some kind of natural disaster, which has happened here in the recent past in our state, unfortunately. But other than that, really, there's no other reasons for a late election. Is that right, Cameron?
There could be other reasons, which, if a taxpayer makes a late election, of course, it'll go to commissioner for review, and he has to determine if it's good and reasonable cause for the election to be late and for the revenue to accept it. So that would be a good example. Maybe a natural disaster occurred and it gave taxpayers, extensions to file federally. Therefore, we would most likely definitely allow the late election. But it's a basis by basis because there's a lot of maybe potential reasons why a late election would be made that may have not been made timely. So yeah, late elections, also early revocations are possible. Maybe if an entity it just dissolves and there's no reason for them to file consolidated anymore.
Mhm.
There'll be different reasons, but yeah, all these C&W true late elections and also early revocation requests will always go to the commissioner for review.
Okay.
And it's always important to, address the commissioner, give him a few paragraphs of what's going on and why the election should be approved and why it couldn't be made on time, just for
Okay.
him to be able to digest everything fast and a quicker process, pretty much.
Gotcha. I should have asked anything anybody want to add to the registration process before. I think we're moving on to amendments next. Yeah. Um, all right, so amending the election, if there's a change in ownership, a merger, which I believe that can get kind of complicated, right? And liquidation of a member, you're going to have to go in and amend the election. That's something you can also do on 10-tap, and we're going to show you how to do that here in a minute. The member exiting the group is excluded from the group and computes its net worth on an unconsolidated basis. So that's going to be on F1. Is that right, Cameron?
Yes, ma'am.
So how does that work? And the same with with mergers. How does that affect things? I know with mergers it definitely gets even more complex, but what do you see as issues arising on those
So yeah,
occurrences?
it'd be important for the, once the maybe entity is sold and no longer part of the group, that it's important for them to file F1, also file an amended election to remove that member. And it's always good to maybe put a paragraph just to explain that when the amended elections sit in to taxpayer services, make it easy on them to understand what's going on, and also not include that member on the consolidated balance sheet, for the group's Schedule F2 if they were sold. So a few things there, just remember, just to file a minute election, remove that member. They must file Schedule F1 since they left the group. And also just make sure to send an explanation or you can just have everything resolved and make sure that the group's not including their assets or balance sheet on that Schedule F2 for the consolidated filing.
Mm.
Andrea, is there anything that you see in your group that comes through on amendments specifically that is a common misunderstanding or something where it has to get rejected? Do you see any certain occurrences that would be good?
Absolutely. So usually when processing amendments, frequently taxpayers will leave the account number off. If there's a name change, the name has to actually match our records or what we can verify with Secretary of State. If the entity is not registered with Secretary of State and there was a name change, if you could just include the articles of amendments from the original charter state so we can update that in our system. Usually just keeping the consolidated election up to date is the biggest thing. If there's members that are coming and going, just remember to always send in the amended election so that our records stay up to date.
And including that documentation from the Secretary of State is something that, like you said, is common. That's going to help your team to be able
Yeah.
to process it
Right,
smoother.
because we would technically deny if the information doesn't match Secretary of State, or if the name change occurred, we don't have documentation of the name change, or if there is an EIN discrepancy, we will have to deny the election and we will request additional documentation. So if you're submitting an amended election, if you could just include all of that at once, that would help us process the election and get it approved.
Great. Good to know. Okay, so moving along here into this is what it looks like in TinTap, assuming you're already logged into your TinTap account, and you will see on from TinTap Home, you'll see all your different tax accounts listed there. Out beside the franchise and excise tax account, you will see, hold on, let me turn on my little laser pointer. Out beside your F&E account, you will see make a payment, view file returns. You're going to click on additional actions. And then once you click on additional actions, it defaults over to tax credits, but you're going to click on additional actions again up at the top here. These are kind of like tabs. And then you'll see it right here, consolidated net worth, election, registration, application. This is also where you will do amendments. And this is what it looks like once you click on the application. You'll see the option here to either amend the election, do a new election, or revoke the election. Those are your three options, and then you will just continue on through that process. And like I said, if you ever want to refer back to the instructions on the paper form as you're tabbing through and going through the application on TinTap, that might be helpful for you as you're doing that. Anything y'all want to add to this? I know these get processed through your team, right, Andrea?
Yes.
I would assume that just like filing a return on TinTap, it will does it kind of correct errors for you as you're going through the application, so you can't even submit if some information's not there. But do you see information get
I don't know.
misunderstood
I'm
through
not
the?
sure if it autocorrects it for you. We
Okay.
do receive elections with incorrect information. And again, it can be an account number has been transposed, or EIN is incorrectly entered. And a lot of times when we receive those, my unit, we will contact the taxpayer or the authorized representative directly to get additional information. That way we don't have to reject the application. But just again, just making sure the information is correct, checking your records. You can always contact our unit directly by phone to verify the account number or Secretary of State control number, or even the commencement date we have on file. You can always just give us a call. We can give you that information.
Great. And we'll be sharing that their direct line here in just a few with you guys. All right, there are some exclusions. The commissioner of the Department of Revenue is authorized to exclude one or more persons from an affiliated group if it's determined that they are so remote from the taxpayer that it can't obtain the information necessary to calculate the net worth of the group. Excluding them from the affiliated group must result in a fair representation of the affiliated group's net worth. If the exclusion is granted, all members of the affiliated group are bound by it, and the commissioner may require information to substantiate a request due on or before the due date of the return when the exclusion is to be applicable, and may, for good cause, accept a late filed request. Anything to add to that, Cameron, that you see with exclusions?
Yeah, pretty much just like the C&W late and early revokes. Yeah, it's just all commissioner review. So yeah, it's always good to just have a good explanation to them and just address them directly. And then we will always, have that forwarded up to his review, and he'll make a determination on that. And letters should be also issued, and and taxpayer should hear back from him. But yeah, if there's but yeah, pretty much same story, just all commissioner review to kind of make a determination on.
Okay. I would assume, I don't know if it's correct to assume, but I would assume that that's not very common that this comes about, but I don't know if that's correct or incorrect to assume that.
Yeah, year by year, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes be in flux, sometimes not too common. But yeah, just you never know.
Well, we have gone ahead and opened up the chat for you guys to put your questions to Cameron and Andrea and to our team in the chat. Go ahead and Billy, if you want to come back in and join us. Pull up this.
While we're doing that, I just wanted to kind of point out, the central theme I'm seeing among the discussion you guys had is communication is a big deal. And the reason it is because it's a complex thing. So a lot of you on this call are CPAs and you deal with a lot of very complex issues. And we want you to reach out to us when you see things aren't lining up. One other thing, and I think Andrea, you particularly can agree with this. We get inundated with a lot of requests for registration adjustments, exemptions, et cetera, at different times of the year. So the more proactive you can be in letting us know about any changes that you might need or something that's not lining up, that would be a great idea. Like going out to 10 Tap and seeing if things are in order for that client. As an example, if you don't see something that you need, let us know. Would you agree with that, Andrea?
Yes, absolutely. Just keeping the records up to date is the most proactive way to get your request approved and timely approved.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds great. Let's see. Let's take a look at some of the chat things here.
Yeah,
Can you apply the credits of a subsidiary to the consolidated net worth? And how does that work?
um, I guess it depends. Well, credits, yeah, they can be transferred to other taxpayers. So I would say no to that. Unless they have a unitary filing for 174 for financial institutions, they file consolidated return. They're allowed to use those credits that are generated by the subsidiaries. However, if they're filing like a 170, yeah, they can move the tax credits to one of the related entities.
Okay. Laura asked, can you please explain out-of-state nexus and what net tax must be paid? That's sort of a big sort of overview question. Anybody want to give a 20-word or less answer to that one?
Yeah, I guess it depends on your property, payroll, and sales. So if you have
Yeah.
no property and no payroll in Tennessee, and I guess maybe you have like sales, you may have some nexus. I guess it depends on the bright line nexus. But yeah, I guess it just depends on your property and payroll. And then if you're registered with the Secretary of State, if you're registered with them, you have $100 due no matter what your payroll, property, and sales is. But once you get your property, payroll, and sales and compute it to the everywhere factors on Schedule N, it'll pretty much give you your ratio for your franchise and excise tax.
And Cameron, you bring up something that's kind of interesting. It's a slightly off topic, but we get this question pretty much every day. And it's like, why do I owe Tennessee franchise and excise tax? I don't even have any involvement in your state. Why do I owe that? Well, you registered here, at least with the Secretary of State, and it basically turned the machine on. So if you
Yeah,
didn't have any
unfortunately.
presence in our state or any reason to register, probably shouldn't have done that. So now
Yeah.
there's a way out of it. People like Andrea and I and other people, we can help you out of that deal. We're good. But the thing is, if you are registered with the Secretary of State, you're kind of on the hook for $100, just like you're saying there, Cameron. Would you agree with that, Andrea?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
We do have a webinar dedicated to the topic of Nexus for out-of-state businesses. If you are located in another state, that might be of interest to you. In our webinar video library, you can check that out.
So let's see, another good question. Let's see, I have filed a few amended election forms to add newly acquired entities to our group. Does this reset the time that we are bound to the election 5 years from the amended year? No, so it's based on your original election. So once that election's made, it's binding for 5 years as of that date. So once you file like amended elections to include or disinclude members, there's no like time frame to get those in, but just definitely submit them eventually to have those members removed from to or from the group. So amended elections don't have like a due date, but yeah, they're nice to have because you want to have, of course, have like members that are no longer on the group in the group if they've been sold or disadded or need to be added. So it's important just to have that figure it out on the front end to cause less confusion for us.
So it's binding
Right.
5 years from the original
Data
election.
is made.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Amending it doesn't add any time to it, doesn't reset the clock.
So Cameron, piggyback, and you may have mentioned this, and I apologize if I missed it. So let's say, my 5-year minimum period is up. It continues until it revoked, right? Is that basically true?
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's ongoing until you revoke the election. Of
Okay.
course, you got to
Okay.
revoke
That's what
it
I
by
was
the
thinking.
extended due date of the return. So just, yeah, if you choose to revoke it, just make sure to revoke it before the due date of the return or the extended due date. But yeah, as long as they made the election, it's ongoing till it's revoked, unless anything changes that forces them to, like maybe the members are discluded or they go out of business, something like that. But yeah, it's ongoing till they revoke it.
You can't just go ahead and start filing non-consolidated once until you revoke your
Yeah, and you don't, once the
F2.
election's made, you can't just go like, oh,
Okay.
we pay less franchise tax based on Schedule F1. Yeah, once that election's made, it's binding for 5 years unless there's some kind of special commissioner review where he allows the revocation.
This is where you wish you had a crystal ball, right? To be able to see what's the net worth of all of my affiliated entities going to look like over the next 5 years.
Right. So there's a question here from Jennifer. Who is considered a unitary group and what is the difference between that and affiliated group? The biggest difference there is the filing. If you're filing a 174 as a captive REIT or a financial institution, you can be considered a unitary group, which means that you're just filing a combined return, including all of the earnings for all of the unitary members. So they'll just file just one franchise and excise FAE 174 return versus filing a separate return for each entity. A unitary group does not have to file a consolidated election to have that election put in place. You could just send us a correspondence either via mail or a 10-tap or email, and we can add the codings to the account, linking all of the unitary members to the unitary group to put that in place. Again, the difference is just typically the filings is only for a financial institution or a captive REIT. So if you're filing a 170, you usually do not qualify as a unitary group.
See another interesting question. So this is, does the affiliate group include foreign subsidiaries of a foreign parent? Oh shoot, I lost there. That is not part of the U.S. affiliate group. So this would be bound if that foreign entity is a domestic person. So the domestic person test is 20% of their property, payroll, and sales are in the United States. So if they meet that, and they also have 50% ownership, they can be included in the consolidated net worth election. But very good question.
Jay asked a question too. If an entity is included on part one, an F&E number will be created for it. Is that a true statement?
I would
It
believe
is.
so, yes.
It is. If they're listed on part one, we will register them for a franchise and excise account if there is an account already established.
Okay.
Yep.
Another question I see is, what is the requirement to select reporting entity for the consolidated net worth? So I guess on the election, you can say who's the parent of the election. But of course, part one is all your filing entities, and part two is all your non-filing entities that are being included in the election as like they have 50% ownership, but they don't have nexus to Tennessee and they have no reason to file. So and just remember, all entities that are part one must use consolidated. They're F2. They all must file their own returns and use Schedule F2 to report this consolidated net worth.
Let
And
me,
all entities on part two do not file. So please don't file or we will create accounts for them in error. But
Right.
yeah, things happen like that. That's true. We send out notices for things like that that gets people's attention. So, but we
Mhm.
can fix things. That's the good news. Dana asked a question. Uh, this is something we probably should all remember. I appreciate this and your information. I'm new to business taxes and I own a small business. Is this something I need to worry about? No, almost guaranteed not, because the stuff we're talking about today, Dana, is for businesses that there's multiple companies joined together for franchise and excise tax. So A huge majority of our small businesses out there, this is not an issue for you. We do appreciate you attending, and we know that you'll be interested in a lot of our other webinars, particularly our new business workshop that we'll have again in April. And we certainly welcome you into that and into any of our other things too. But thanks for coming today.
Or to keep in mind when your business grows so much, you've got affiliated entities. That'd be
Yeah,
a good problem to
yeah.
have. But
So you got like a dozen other companies that you link together this way. That'd be great.
yeah, there
Common
were
thing
really. I'm
is,
glad you addressed that because I saw a couple of questions in here from new businesses. Is this something I need to be doing? If
Yeah.
you've got what you're seeing right here, if you're part of an affiliated group, basically, you've got a parent company or you are a parent company of another company. Basically, this would apply to you.
Like Olin says here, I have a semi truck company with one truck and one trailer. I'm only one person at the company. Doesn't sound like this is
No.
for you. This sounds like not for you.
and I'll also make another point. So there's like a, of course, when you have your return in front of you, there is like a checkbox for the election. So always, if you make a consolidated net worth election, make sure that checkbox is selected on there. And just, yeah, just remember it's all selected for all of the group members that file. So there's no confusion or, there's no errors with 10 tap or whatever way is used to file the return. So it doesn't have like issues like, oh, they don't have this box selected. So we're thinking they're going to use schedule F1. Just, yeah, make sure that box is selected for schedule F2. So it defaults to using, the consolidated filing for consolidated net worth filing for schedule F2.
I'm wondering if
And
that would error out. Do you know if you've got an entity if we have an entity that we're assuming based on the election is part of part of C&W and we see them file an F1 and they haven't had an amendment, they haven't like, is that going to flag? Is that going to cause a flag for your team, Cameron?
It's a good question. So sometimes they'll create review work items we like to call. It'll just make sure we review to see if there's consolidated net worth election, make sure there's no like one that's pending, and also the correct schedules are used. So sometimes it will, sometimes the system will figure it out and say, oh, there's an indicator showing they do have an election, so it'll auto-correct itself. But sometimes, the system will have its own little issues where it's like, oh, that box wasn't selected using F1. We're going to send this return through anyways and just have audit review it and make sure it's all good. But yeah, I mean, there's always some issues when these are filed because yeah, there's little things like that, of course, that are common mistakes that sometimes will go through when you're filing a return, thinking about all the other stuff you have to do when you're, filing that return and all that. But yeah, just a little common, mistake, just forgetting to check that checkbox on the return.
yep, and we keep using the term election. Of course, we're talking about the consolidated net worth election, meaning that you don't have to do this,
And
and
that's
this and that's a key point, and of course, smaller businesses, again, you guys that are in here, this is not for you. You don't have to worry about all this, but it is still an interesting topic today.
Yeah, and another question I see, if I'm a single member owner, I would only need to file the standard franchise and excise tax return. Yeah, that's correct.
Yep.
If you only have one entity, there's no reason for this election. So you just use the F-170 return and just use Schedule F1 and all the standard apportionment schedules.
And this is probably a good time to advertise too. And I know Katie would agree with me on this. Um, if you're a small business person, even really any kind of business that's subject to franchise and excise tax or any of our other taxes, make sure you go onto our 10 tab system. Make sure you go out there and you get your good username and password and make sure that your accounts are associated and all this stuff because we're recording this in late January and in a blink of an eye it's going to be April 15th again. So we in the tax world we know what that means. It means huge amounts of questions, things that people need adjusted at the last minute. So if you can work ahead a little bit on that too, that'd be great. Don't forget too, on 10 tap you have the ability to file the return and schedule a payment. So that's a great thing. You do not have to do it on the last day. You can have us take the money out on the last day. And of course, with franchise and excise, it's a little bit different because a lot of you have extensions, things of that nature that play into this whole thing as well, estimated payments and all that. So work ahead a little bit and help us help you. Okay. What else are you guys seeing that we want to address here for a few minutes?
So I do see an interesting question. So could this apply to two LLCs that file as S corps, both owned 100% of it by one individual? So I mean, that would, as long as they meet the 100% ownership, they could qualify as long as they make the election on timely. So if you know if you have two LLCs that file as S corp, and they both have 100% ownership by one individual, but I guess it would depend if those entities have ownership in each entity, if they have like that 50% ownership test. So that would be a question for that if the entity itself owns 50% of the other corporation, not just the individual. But good question.
Mm-hmm. Another person said they've been assessed several late payments for not filing quarterly. Yes, that's the estimated tax payments, and you do have to make those on a quarterly basis. And of course, not every entity is subject to that. There are certain rules, certain levels, certain percentages, and things of that. We're not really here to talk about that today. But yeah, you can. You do have to pay as you go, so to speak, for Tennessee's franchise and excise tax. It's sort of unusual. Our other taxes don't work that way.
Yeah, so that rule on that is if you have tax over 5,000 due in your previous year and you're gonna have most likely 5,000 tax due in the current year, you will be subject to those estimated payments.
That's a good general rule. That's right.
Mhm.
What are
Oh,
you
there,
saying, Andrea? Anything out there?
yes, actually, there's one question about the due date of the initial election. So the
Okay.
initial election can be submitted on or before the extension due date. So if you have an extension on your franchise and excise return or a federal extension, you can submit your initial consolidated election application up until that extension due date, and it will be considered timely.
I see another good question. So if a group of subsidiaries files in Tennessee, but the parent does not, should we include the parent in the affiliated group for franchise tax? Yes, and just make sure to include them on part two of the election, saying they're not filing, they don't have subject to Tennessee in part two of the C&W election form.
Do any of y'all know a person that works for a CPA firm uses a software package that says the set schedule 170 NC isn't on their electronic filing software? Is there any plans for that being incorporated? I didn't know if you knew that or not. Sometimes we don't really get that information, so I didn't know if y'all happen to know.
I
No,
do
I haven't
not.
heard of it. No.
But if that form is not on there, that would cause issues most likely. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely good good ticket question for sure. We can definitely look into that or forward to someone that would know more
And
about
it
this.
yeah, and it may be a good idea to reach out to the software provider too to see if they can't get with our tech people to
Mhm.
figure out how to get that done. That's it's not that we wouldn't accept it, it's just that it has to be available. I don't know that it's not available in general, but system wide, but I don't know if it's like a software thing within your particular program or not. It's a great question though. And certainly I can see why you want that. There's no question that doing it electronically is way better.
Yes. Here's another question. If we have 10 entities that are included in combined filing, do we need to register each entity on 10 tab? It is preferred that you register your entities on 10 tab or send in a paper application, as that is a great way for us to expedite the process. We do receive several elections every day, and if we are registering entities, sometimes we do receive spreadsheets of consolidated entities. So it just helps us process the application a little faster, but also you're putting in the correct information. Of course, if maybe an issue with the handwriting, we were unable to read certain numbers on the application. So if you're completing the application on 10 tab, of course, it's legible and it can be processed a little bit faster with accurate information. So yes, please, if you can, register your entities online through 10 tab.
On that note, y'all, I'm going to go over to our website real quick and show you. Hold on just a second. So I just pulled up. Paisley asked a question of a few minutes ago. Show us, or what do you mean by checking the box for consolidated net worth? So I'm going to show
yeah.
you on the paper form. Now, we just, as Andrew said, filing is required online on 10 tab, but sometimes it's good to refer back to paper forms, paper applications just to see. So I'm going to show y'all on the paper FAE 170. You can see right here, and this it looks a little bit different on 10 tap, but it's still worded the same way, I think. Taxpayer has made an election to calculate net worth per provisions of TCA. Basically, that's the consolidated net worth election right there. That's where you would check it. And on 10 tap, it's going to be worded, I think, the exact same way. I don't know if correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody knows that, but Paisley, I think that may be what you're talking about. So this just, again, like Andrea and Cameron have both said, everything kind of needs to line up just right. When that box is checked, our system knows to be looking for you as a
Hey,
consolidated or
Katie, before you
affiliated.
move from that page,
Yeah.
I got to make one more special announcement. Oh my goodness. The
What?
second box from the top where it says final return, for those of you that don't know, that is a box that you check when your business is going out of business. That is your final return. It's not your final return for this year. Don't check that box unless you're going out of business. Okay. Also, if you are going out of business, check the box
Yeah.
because we'll continue to assess you for till kingdom come until you check that box. Okay. So important. I mean, we're laughing a little bit. Oh my gosh, y'all.
It's not funny when you wind up in collections,
Hundreds
though.
and
Right.
no thousands of
Um,
things happen when this isn't done
yeah,
right. Yeah.
right.
The other thing I
Also,
wanted to show y'all, because Cameron, you've mentioned it a couple times, and Andrew, you have too. This is the paper consolidated net worth application. Uh, when you're talking about that part one and part two, and they were both mentioning how that gets messed up a lot. The part one, this is where affiliated members who do have nexus in Tennessee are listed in part one. Part two is for affiliated members who are not going to be who do not have nexus in Tennessee for franchise tax.
yeah,
Right.
and this is an example would be like you have your affiliation schedule and you're going through to see who has the 50% ownership checked. They can be included to the net worth election. So then some of them may not be subject to Tennessee tax, but they're still included in the consolidated net worths calculation for Schedule F2. So that'd be a potential benefit for including them and using the consolidated net worth election.
Again, the
But
whole
yeah, that's
idea here
exactly for that.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on top of you, Cameron.
No, you're fine. Sorry, Billy.
No, I was just going to say the whole idea here is this a tax advantage situation for the taxpayer? By doing this election, is this a good thing to save them money? That's what we're after. You know, if it's not, then probably don't want to go through all this. Obviously, you want to just pay as you would normally regularly pay. But for those taxpayers that do have large losses in one particular aspect of their business and gains in others, it could be an advantage. Absolutely.
Right. Another thing I want to add to this form is, I know this thing's very minor, but just be sure that the form is actually signed if you're submitting a paper application. Uh, it happens numerous of times we have to deny elections just simply because it's not signed. So on the very first page, there is a place for the
There it is,
signature.
bottom, Katie.
Very
Bottom
bottom.
So just
first
make
page.
sure
Ah,
that
there it
it
is.
is,
Yeah,
yes,
there
make
you
sure
go.
that it is signed and dated.
You can also scan that and email that to us signed, and that'd be fine. We'll take
Yes.
that.
Always say it's always important to have these documents retained too. So, maybe if you mail it and for whatever reason post office loses it, it's always good to have some kind of retained documentation to show it's sent. But yeah, it's
Absolutely.
always important to have some kind of documentation. It's like, oh yeah, we sent this on time. Here's our proof.
While I've got this up, Andrea, Cameron, is there anything else before I go back over to the other PowerPoint? Is there anything
Uh,
else on the application or on the FA 170 that you want me to show anybody while we've got them up?
I guess it's always, I mean, it's kind of minor, but sometimes, one of those boxes will be checked in error and it'll cause confusion. So maybe like you're making an amended election to add or remove a member and you accidentally select like new election. Yeah,
Mm.
please don't do that because that'll cause confusion.
Right. Because if it's a new
Yeah, just
election, just make
very
sure you're doing a
small
new.
issue. Yeah, but yeah, just make sure the right box is selected. At least have a box selected. Don't just send it with no boxes selected.
Right. Right.
And also the effective day of the election. Yeah, just make sure it makes sense. Of course, when you're completing this election, anybody that's being included to the election, they must all close their books on the same year end. So if they all are 12/31 filers, they got to close on 12/31 to be included. So you can't have members closing their books on 12/31 and also closing on 7/31. Those members that you're trying to include on the 7/31 ending, books closing on that date, they can't be included. So just
One good,
just
I'm sorry, go ahead, Cameron.
just remember they got to be unitary. They got to be in the same return unitary filing, and they most likely included in like a federal form 851.
I was going to say, if you send these in by email, one great thing is that we have your name and phone numbers fields for that, and obviously your email address. So if we have to reach out to you, it's very easy to do. If you end up sending things in by paper, maybe one thing to do is to ensure that we do have your good contact information somewhere, either on the form or with an attached letter or something, because it makes life a lot easier than to just send letters back and forth. We're missing this. We don't understand this. So if we can pick up the phone and call you, or just send you a quick email saying, "Hey, tell me what you mean by this," or "Here's what you need to do," so much easier.
Scroll up on that first page. Sometimes I hope they include like where you can put your email on this. So yeah, so you have your telephone
So
number
there's
and
a
email
field
there.
for it. Yeah,
Yeah.
make sure it's
Mhm.
filled out
So if
then.
that's on there and
Yeah.
we have questions, we'll definitely be reaching out to you through those two methods.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go back over. Actually, while I'm here, let me show you guys a couple of resources. If you've attended our webinars before, this shouldn't be news to you, but earlier I was talking about the webinar video library. I mentioned the Nexus for out-of-state entities. Let me show you how I get over to the webinar library. And this is also how you can view the recording of this webinar later. This is tn.gov/revenue. You're going to scroll down to taxpayer education. Click on that, and then tax webinars. And that's where you'll always see a way to register for our upcoming. So later on today, you'll be able to register for our next webinar, which is about fonts. And down a little further, this is our webinar video library. And I was telling you about the Nexus. So we've got this is how you can click on the video. This is how you can click on the PowerPoint of the webinar. There's also a webinar about filing the franchise excise tax return. There's a little bit about consolidated net worth on there. And like Andrew was talking earlier about how to know about the one, whether to use 174 or 170, I believe it was financial institution or not. There's a good
Yes.
little chart in this webinar about that as well. And then one more place I want to show y'all, go back to tn.gov/revenue under tax resources and then tax guidance, and click on tax manuals and the franchise and excise tax manual. Right here, lots of information about every topic that we have been discussing today. Especially if you're a tax professional and you have not discovered our tax manuals, they are fantastic. We use them internally all day, every day. They're an exhaustive resource on all things state of Tennessee taxes. So check it out.
Absolutely.
And I see another good question. If amending election and adding a member due to acquisition is the effective date of the acquisition, also if the election is already in effect, this acquired company must be included. So, so I guess for the first question, if there's already an election, that would be the effective date. But I guess on the amended election, you can put you're adding a member, and you can put maybe when that member was added on part one. I think there's a line there to say when was this member added. But of course, if when adding members, as long as they close their books on the same day, they could be immediately included to that election. So maybe say an entity was bought on 5/1/25, they would have to file two short period returns. So, 1/1/25 to 12 or 5/1/25 for the non-consolidated part, and they have to file that. using F1 most likely for when they were not part of the group, but that 5/2/25 to 12/31/25 return, they can use F2 since they're most likely have filed to include them as a member. So for the second part, also if the election is already in effect, is it required for the company? Must be included. So it's not really required, but I mean, you may want to add them if they're have 50% ownership, they meet that that test. But yeah, if you don't want to add a certain member, I don't believe you're required to. But yeah, once you add that member, of course, you have to include them when you're calculating the net worth.
It's binding for 5 years unless they dissolve or basically.
Now, see another question. Check the box and withdraw from the SOS, right? So I think that's more of like the final return status. Um, I think that would be correct. So I guess when you check that box for final return, you'll get your tax clearance letter. You'll take it to the SOS and they'll get you closed out. And another good point about that is if you're getting minimum returns and you have no nexus with property, payroll, or sales, remember you can file a final return for that too to get the filing requirement off to get that tax clearance cleared and close out the Secretary of State as well. So you don't have to keep filing $100 returns. But that's only if you have no nexus and you register the Secretary of State in error, or you found that you don't need to file returns. But I guess that's a little off topic. Let's see.
I've seen a couple of questions in here, and I don't know. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if one of our subject matter experts do, but several questions about if an election is revoked, is there any kind of waiting period till another election can be filed? Not that I know of, but is
No,
there?
yeah, there's no waiting period. So if you revoke the election for any reason, I mean, you could come back around and make a new election. Yeah, the only requirement is if it's made by the due date, the extended due date. So there's no like gap between when you can make another one. It's like, yeah, if as long as you meet that requirement, yeah, you can do so. But yeah, the only big thing is once you make it, you got to do it for 5 years,
5
unless
years.
for some reason the commission, there's a good reasonable cause. The commissioner allows an early revocation.
I noticed one question about filing the F&E returns. When are the due dates? That's very basic. So essentially, the franchise and excise returns are due the 15th day of the fourth month following the tax year. And then the extensions can apply. We do honor federal extensions. And then for estimated tax payments, they're due quarterly throughout the year. We won't go through all the minutia with that, but we do have all that information on our website. And in the webinars, like Katie was saying, F&E Basics has that information in there. So go review that and you will find lots of information, or shoot us an email and we'll be real specific with you on it. Email address is coming up soon.
We will start wrapping things up in a few minutes, maybe have time to take another question or two. But while y'all are looking in the chat for questions, I'm going to go ahead and cover a couple things here. How to reach out to us. We've mentioned it several times. This right here, revenue.support@tn.gov. That's a way to, internally we call it a help ticket or a Zendesk ticket, but that's the way that email turns into a help ticket for us. And it's a great way for kind of a complex question if your question didn't get answered today, because we've got lots of people in here actually. Send it to revenue.support@tn.gov, or you can call Andrea. Your group is the registration group. This is your number. This goes to your group, right? The 0700
Yes.
253 0700. If you've just got a general tax question about some basics, you can call our general tax line 615-253-0600. But again, for specific registration questions, 615-253-0700.
Yep.
And you really will get a person when you call us pretty
Yep,
quickly too.
sure will. April 15th, you may have trouble.
Yes.
Just let you know. Yeah. We do. We just want to say for all the CPAs out there, and really for all of you as business owners, how much we appreciate you for all the hard work you do. Tax filing season is tough on taxpayers and tax professionals. So, and really us too, to be honest. But I just want to shout out to you guys because You guys are what make it happen, and we appreciate it. Our state has a great voluntary compliance rate. We do have a collections division for a reason, obviously, but most of our taxpayers try to do the right thing, and we appreciate you very, very much. Any other
Cameron,
questions, guys?
Andrea? Yeah, that's what I was about to ask you. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
Um,
A few more questions, but I'll
Okay.
let Andrea see if she has any she's going to tackle.
Yes, I have one. Does each entity, when registering with TDOR, require its own FEIN, especially for disregarded single member LLCs? So a single member LLC does not necessarily have to have an EIN number. It can also register for tax accounts with the Social Security number of the taxpayer. If you do not want to use the Social Security number or it's already in our system, perhaps under an individual account, you can send us a paper application and we will register the account with a placeholder ID. But essentially, yes, each entity that's registering with the TDOR should have its own federal ID number, as we are not able to share IDs in the system.
Great question.
And I see another question. What is the form we have to file to revoke the election? So again, that's just the C&W election form. So there's like a checkbox for the revoke election. So that you'll see that on the form. So all you have to do is just check that box, make sure you include the members that are being revoked and all that. And it should be, sent to registration to process and review, and it should go through unless it's before 5 years.
Well, I think it's time to go ahead and wrap things up. We filled up that hour with a lot of great information. Wow, and really good questions that you guys had about consolidated net worth. It's a pretty complex topic, and I hope that we were able to take a little bit of the guesswork out of it for you. Could not thank you guys enough, Cameron and Andrea. Definitely wouldn't have been able to do this one without you guys. You're great subject matter experts, and we just are very grateful to you for joining us today. And thanks to all of you for joining us. Again, next month is fonts, which is F&E exemption. So join us, please. These webinars are free the last Tuesday of the month, unless that falls on a holiday. And we look forward to seeing you again. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Katie.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.